how should we be seeing these COVID restrictions right now, and do you think people should respond to them? Because at the moment there seems to be either you fully just give into it all, or you go and you illegally protest and you're one of those crazies. There's this binary.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. There's not a lot of nuance in the COVID debate. I think one of the concerns that I've got, and I think the Alliance has, that we may see the COVID rules used in other contexts when we get through this pandemic. To illustrate what I mean, we have seen anti-terror laws used in the context of bikie gangs, for example.
Right, of course.
In other words, taking anti-terror laws and then applying them in another context. Yeah. In relation to COVID, some of those powers that have been used to effectively move people on to on the spot fines, which were unthinkable 2 or 3 years ago. We may see some of these techniques sit on the statute books and get used in other contexts.
Right.
Certainly last year, when there were bans placed in Victoria on use of, for example, City Square, beaches, etc., one could just imagine similar types of laws being used in the context of, media pressure about young people, violence in public places, and we need to clamp down on this, and therefore we'll use this sweeping power. So we need to be very careful that these COVID restrictions are only allowed on the basis of them being necessary to fight this pandemic. And then once they are removed, they ought to stay off they're not on the statute books because they're orders, but certainly the sort of powers that are given here should not be then translated into other legislation.
So what is your prediction then for, obviously, the state of emergency in Victoria? And I think we're the only one with a sunset clause, right? Anyway, ours is running out in December. Yeah. Now, this is the scary part. A lot of people were pushing for custom legislation, and there were a bunch of QCs who put up some ideas around that, and they rejected that 6 months ago. So they're going to come up with custom legislation in December. You can pretty much guarantee they're going to build in some big, Section 200 type powers going forward permanently, right?
I think there's no doubt. I think that what governments do, and they've done it, as I say, in the context of 9/11, they've done it and will do it in the context of COVID, is to pick up some of the more draconian elements of control and make them a permanent feature of the statute book. Whether or not the powers will be used in the future is another question. But this idea that, for example, you can legislate by way of orders rather than regulation or legislation that can be scrutinised by the Parliament, that I think is going to become a permanent feature of our lawmaking going forward, and it's dangerous.
Are you suggesting? Oh, sorry.
I was going to say one of the problems is with the powers under public health legislation and orders is that they constantly change.
Yes. They're
difficult to understand. They're not well drafted because they're often drafted in a hurry.
Yes.
And they're not accessible to people. All of the key features of a legal system that subscribes to the rule of law.
So there's a bit of chat about this. They're not law. I mean, they are legal. They are directions. They are enforceable. And a magistrate is going to say, no, you broke the direction. Here's your fine, right?
Correct.
But are you suggesting that all of these measures that they're bringing into force as CHO directives should be brought in as regulation, and that they could do that? That's an option.
Well, what I'm saying is that there's been a great reliance on these directives and orders. Understandably so, in the sense that you've got to move quickly. But the major concern I have about it is that, firstly, they're not subject to scrutiny because Parliament has not sat as frequently as it should.
Right.
I mean, there's no reason why these orders should not go to a parliamentary committee, subordinate legislation committee, and be looked at very quickly and turned around quickly to make sure that they're fair, to make sure that they're not going to have unintended consequences. Right. The second feature is that they're difficult to find. If you tell people where to go and find, road traffic legislation, it's pretty easy. You Google it and you find it. If you try and Google public health orders under the COVID in the COVID scenario, it's really, really difficult. And so, and that's why I think people become angry. You know, I've spoken to people in their 60s and 70s who said, look, I had no idea that I was in breach of one of these orders, and yet now I've got a $1,700 fine.
Wow.
And it's not fair to do that to people. It's unfair because in many cases here, you'd almost argue ignorance of the law is an excuse.